On April the 18th, 34 years ago, Africa's 51st independent state was born. Vowing to end social inequality and racial oppression, Zimbabwe's first Prime Minister and current President Robert Mugabe proclaimed a new era in the nation's history. But the promises and hopes of independence are yet to translate into sustained economic growth. In downtown Algiers, groups of young supporters waved the president's pictures, honked car horns and set off fireworks in celebration of their president's re-election. But the aging leader's health has left more questions about possible transition in Algeria, where who will replace him should he fall ill in his fourth term, and how far the new government will go towards introducing political and economic reforms. These were all questions waiting for answers. Now, welcome to Africa Today. I am Mike Okwoche, and we have social media presence. And for questions, comments, and suggestions about the show, you can share your thought with us on Twitter at TVC Africa Today, or send an email to africatoday@tvcnews.tv. A report to launch a show about Algeria's plight before the election, and Africa Today will continue. Welcome aboard.
More than a decade after the end of the conflict with Al-Qaeda-linked insurgents, Algeria's dark years of violence are fresh enough to keep people wary of change. For years, citizens here have waited for their living conditions to improve. They say officials who made promises at each election never matched their words with action. And while some residents of Ain Najjar slum remain optimistic that the situation will get better, others are, however, not interested in taking part in an election which they say yields nothing.
يخرجوا لنا الدولة ويمركونا ويروحوا وقالوا لنا ذا خطرة يعطونا هيا وتلاقت لنا مع الفوت قالوا نحترموا الفوت ان شاء الله رانا على ربي نقارعوا خويا
من نهار بدا بوت في لقاء عنا جمع مساج قاعد ماذا بينا يتوشي عنا جا خاش راهي بزاف نفوطينا يا نفوطي واسمو نورمال عادي.
Criticisms notwithstanding, ailing incumbent Abdulaziz Bouteflika looks set to win the presidential race with the support of the Front de Liberation National Party, which has dominated Algerian politics since independence from France. In the meantime, presidential hopeful Ali Benflis has warned that his supporters, consisting of 60,000 people, would monitor the elections, vowing to protest if polls are rigged in Bouteflika's favor.
Je suis sûr de rien, mais vous aurez remarqué que je suis très serein. منين تجي لا sérénité. كل واحد عنده لا روسيت نتاعها. أنا لا sérénité تاعي جايبها من الإيمان. أنا je suis un musulman pratiquant. إذن ما كانش ليلة طلع علي النوم.
Though 77-year-old Bouteflika has not campaigned himself and has only rarely spoken in public since suffering a stroke last year, opposition leaders believe the ailing leader's re-election bid is the FLN party's last gasp at power.
And eventually, Bouteflika won the election. Now, far away from Algeria, in President Mugabe's early years, the government focused on improving rural access to education and health, as well as providing agricultural help for small-scale farmers. But the social progression of the 1980s was short-lived. A costly military venture into war-torn Democratic Republic of the Congo, then named Zaire, and overdue compensation payouts to war veterans marked the beginning of economic collapse in November 1997. Now, when the Zimbabwean dollar lost more than 70% of its value at that time. Now, Zimbabwe's independence and issues generating controversy from Algeria's presidential election has got us talking. And on Africa Today, we have Kolawole Oke, a lecturer in one of Nigeria's leading educational institutions, with us in the studio. You're welcome to the studio. And welcome to Africa Today.
Thank you very much.
Right.
My pleasure.
And we have Victor Ohai, a media entrepreneur, with us in the studio as well. Thanks for joining us on Africa Today.
Thank you for having me.
And then later on, we'll be linking up with Nigel Mugamu, a media entrepreneur as well from Zimbabwe. Now, let's start it this way. Zimbabwe and Mugabe, 34 years of both of them running together. It seems right now Mugabe is Zimbabwe and Zimbabwe is Mugabe. Victor Kai.
Well, he's a major factor in Zimbabwe today. Quite frankly, the brand Zimbabwe is Mugabe, and vice versa. Obviously, that's the biggest topic since the, if you like, the I don't want to call it devaluation, or when the currency just lost total value. As I speak to you, I'm a billionaire in Zimbabwean dollars, and I'm not kidding. I have some at home. I'm not kidding. You know, so, but since after that, quite frankly, it's been the major factor. The thing is about, everything is about Mugabe. But the reason is not far-fetched. You have to give him some credit in the sense that he, to a very large extent, was involved in the struggle, you know, for independence, although with another gentleman, Joshua Nkomo, who, I don't know, we haven't heard anything from all these years. I don't even know whether he's still alive or whatever. But you know, what he had going for him was the fact that, you know, he was courageous enough at the time to try to redress the imbalance of, if you like, the apartheid, because I mean, they were all in Southern Africa, but even if it was not as pronounced as what was happening in South Africa, but Zimbabwe also was under dominant white rule.
Okay.
So he was able to try and redress through the issue of redistribution of land and other moves that he made like that. He became very popular among the people, and they have not forgotten.
All right. Well, Kolawole, you've been monitoring Zimbabwe's development over the years and over the decades and so on. Now, as it is, what is very special and unique about Zimbabwe at 34?
Thank you very much. Right from independence, it's very clear that Robert Mugabe has a plan and a mind to stay in power as long as he can afford to be there. Looking at the policies and the implementation of those policies, and the suppression of the opposition, and his face-off with colonial powers, apart from fighting for liberation, subsequent face-off with world economic powers because of his policy of land grabbing. From all indications now, Zimbabwe, Mugabe is one. And it's basically the African thing for a lasting president, because now he can be considered as a lasting president that has spoken to the whole world directly or indirectly that I have no plan to vacate this particular seat. And many have left the country just because of him. He has created crisis that made some to leave. Those who have been able to stand and say no, they left. And those who are still remaining are those just, some are buying time, some are just moving along the line with him. He has the grip of this particular nation. He holds it.
Okay. Now we have Nigel Mugamu joining us now from Zimbabwe, Harare, Zimbabwe. Nigel, welcome to Africa Today. Now, let me ask, what has changed in Zimbabwe in the last 34 years from your opinion and what you've seen?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on your show. What has changed? We've gone through a lot in the last 34 years. We are not where we would like to be. We started off prosperous. You know, I remember I was 2 when we gained independence. So I'm obviously in my late 30s. My parents were here in Zimbabwe before independence, and they remember a time when you couldn't walk in the center of the CBD. You needed a pass to leave certain areas and so forth and so forth. So they've got a different history to the born free, the guys who were born after independence. But what I do remember as a young child is I remember a prosperous country. I was away overseas at university when, as one of your guests spoke about how the dollar crashed, and economically things went down south, and we're slowly re-emerging from all of that. The challenge that we have, to answer your question now, the challenge that we have now at 34 years of independence is, the population, the majority of the population, as is on the continent, 70% of the population are the youth. And what they want now, what they want and need, want an environment that's conducive for business, because business translates to jobs.
All right, let me ask, what's the standard of living? Can you describe the standard of living of an average Zimbabwean as it is right now?
That's a very interesting question to answer. Basically, the civil servants currently, without taking into account the April salary, because the April salary is going to be increased. The average civil servant is on something like $300 a month. Just to give you an idea, we don't obviously have our own currency. We officially have, I want to say 8 or 9, 10 currencies, but we obviously use the US dollar, followed by the South African rand, in that order. But we do accept the yuan, we do accept the yen even. It's things aren't 100%. You know what I mean? There's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of infrastructure development that needs to be done. There was an article that I just read in the paper today. We need something like $18 billion just to invest in the infrastructure, so roads, bridges, that kind of stuff, to just go, just to rebuild. Because obviously we've taken a hit over the last, say, 15 years, where we were just, if you're running a business, obviously, and cash flow is tough. You're obviously focusing on what needs to be paid. But obviously, that the long-term reinvestment of machinery and so forth, you're not necessarily investing in that because you don't have the cash. And that's the same situation with Zimbabwe.
Well, Nigel, thank you very much for your time on Africa Today. Thank you. All right. Now, projecting ahead, we don't have all the time, but what challenges do you think Zimbabwe is going to face in the coming years, either economically or socially, as the case?
Okay. Economically, they're on the rise now. Things have stabilized since they dropped the Zim dollar. But socially and politically, I like Morgan Tsvangirai's consistency. A lot of other politicians have left the country, but if you consider the fact that the only reason, Mugabe is still further ahead is, although it's popular with the old folks and all that, is that there's a manipulation of the process as well. A lot of the younger people and city dwellers are obviously Tsvangirai's supporters. So he does stand a chance. He's had some experience in government. He's also been backed sort of by the West. Okay. So I think if anything should happen, I know those in the establishment right now want to sustain things, but there's no arrowhead, clear arrowhead. So if there's an election afterwards, Tsvangirai stands a good chance, and I think Zimbabwe has a brighter future. It's all right.
Now briefly, what kind of Zimbabwe do you envisage after Mugabe?
Thank you. You see, Mugabe, when is he going to leave? Nobody knows.
I just want a picture.
I
want a picture of how Zimbabwe is going to be.
See, Mike,
Zimbabwe is not.
Mike, I'm not against a leader facing the West. African leader. I love African leaders trying to face the West, correct issues, trying to draw the line. You didn't do this, you do that against our nation. But Mugabe had something like a difference with South Africa.
Okay.
You don't come with a policy against a fellow African nation, a regional power for that matter, and a world power, so to say. And you have to face the consequences. Some time ago, there is this youth leader of the ANC that had something like a line trying to say what Mugabe will say about line issues.
Okay.
You don't do that in South Africa.
Right.
South Africa runs an economy that is basically based and related to whatever the whites are doing right now there.
Okay.
So the man had to be removed from the ANC. And Mugabe needs to correct it. When he leaves power, just as a consequence of every sit-tight leader leaves power, there are some things that will happen. More than 3 million Zimbabweans are currently down in South Africa. They will surely return home.
Okay. Is that right?
And take over.
Thank you very much. Now, Zimbabwe celebrated its 34th independence anniversary with the rest of the world congratulating them. Well, for most Zimbabweans, there was nothing to celebrate as economic problems were taking a toll on their lives. And it is believed that only a few were enjoying the fruits of independence. We'll go on a short break, and when we return, how did ailing president win re-election in Algeria? Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Now, Algerian President Abdulaziz Bouteflika, the independence veteran in power for 15 years, won re-election last week, Friday, with more than 80% of the vote. Opponents dismissed as fraud to keep an ailing leader in power. Now, Bouteflika had cast his vote sitting in a wheelchair on Thursday in what was a rare public appearance since suffering a stroke last year that raised questions about the stability in the North African OPEC oil exporting state. Now, let's talk about Algeria. Now, when Bouteflika was declared winner of the election, were you surprised?
I was not surprised, and the reason is simple. If you notice, when the Arab Spring, was it Arab Spring now rather, when it started from Tunisia and all that, it engulfed Tunisia, Libya, went on to Egypt and all that, but Algeria, it didn't. And the reason was simple. Bouteflika understood he understood these people and how to manipulate the process. They have one thing going for them, oil. The price of oil, you know, at where it is right now, and if it remains like that, would obviously help, because what he was able to do was use what he had to get what he wanted.
Exactly.
You understand? So he was able to, if you like, settle, you know, and sort things out. And they have a robust oil economy. They have a reserve of over $200 billion, you know. So he has money to buy the process. And there's something else you need to understand, the concept of le pouvoir, the powers. These are a group of people. And you see, all you need is in a country is a stabilizing factor. It doesn't matter if the person is on wheelchair or whatever. It's like a Mandela, for instance, who was like a sort of stabilizer for South Africa. But let me just say this quickly before you cut me off. What's happening there is that there are a group of people who need him to remain in power for them to remain relevant.
Okay.
You know, and these are the powers that be.
But this is not about Algerians. It's about the people, the few persons you're talking about.
The few persons, that's a factor, but the people also love him because he's able to play the game. He's able to use what he has to get what he wants from the people.
It's okay. Well, the issue of a president running a presidency or campaigns and not being there, not appearing in campaign grounds and so on, and still won by about 80%. What's your assessment of a scenario like that?
It's disheartening. It's disheartening. He never campaigned. He got to the polling booth. That was when they realized he was on a wheelchair. And he's going to lead this same country for the next 5 years. It cannot happen in Europe. It cannot happen in America. You need to declare your medical status or condition before. Don't forget that Obama was asked to stop smoking tobacco because of he's going to be in the White House, that if you insist, you have to have it through a gum. You can be chewing it as gum, but not puffing the cigar. Now, in Africa, we are not surprised. Why are we not surprised? Because it can only happen in Africa. It has happened in Nigeria, one way or the other. What are we saying? There are some basic factors. Now, talking of every African issue, the effect of colonial powers, former colonial, whatever, I used to say it every now and then. In Rwanda, Belgium, and France, it's not been accused that they had a hand. Don't be surprised. A day will come, Britain will be asked to come and explain what is happening in northern Nigeria. Now, if there is going to be an election, America knows the condition of Bouteflika. Kerry the Secretary of State came to Algeria, came to address them, furtherance of towards the election, so that when he's going to be there for the next 5 years, things will not change. We are talking of a country that is a major energy supplier to Europe. No Western nation will joke with that. So whatever condition he finds himself, let him just make sure.
So with that now, is it that there were some external influences ensuring that Bouteflika wins the elections?
It's part of it. Okay. It's part of it. So far, he knows the card. He knows the game we can play. Then another thing is this. We have too much middle-level leaders in Africa. It's getting too much. There are very few that are now ready to just jump to the front. That was what happened when Abacha was in power in Nigeria here. Now, if somebody can be on a wheelchair and no one is like being groomed enough to overcome the crisis of the early 90s, because we continue to praise him that he is a unifying factor. Are we saying that if he goes out of power, nobody will be enough to hold the country together? So there's too much excuse why sit-tight leaders are being encouraged to remain on the scene.
It's okay. Now, considering the health of the president as it is, would you say he's fit to run the presidency if things remain the way things are now, the way it is right now?
Obviously, he's not feeling too well, but I want to quickly state something. I don't see anything wrong with any leader being in a wheelchair. I think it was, I may be wrong now, but Franklin D. Roosevelt, also of the U.S., that ruled from a wheelchair. I don't have a problem with it. Even if you have a health challenge, as long as it's not terminal or it does not affect your faculties, it's also not a problem. The thing we need to realize is, what kind of influence does this man have on the people? If you notice, he has been a stabilizing factor. And it is critical in leadership. You rule with technocrats, you have other people who do it. You don't necessarily. If in leadership, if you have somebody who is there and he can bring stability, then the people can rule. That's the most important thing in leadership, influence. And if that is missing, take away that influence, get the best eggheads, and the whole place will run into peace. I mean, the whole country will fall apart. That is what he represents. But sadly, and that's where I will agree with him, he may not be the only leader. He has been there for too long. Does it mean that there are no other leaders? These are things that we need to look at, and we need to begin to look at as Africans. Because for too long, we have had too many sit-tight people. In Cameroon, you find the same thing. In Uganda, you find the same thing. So it's like, are these people ever? And I think the solution, maybe it's too early to say so now, but we're coming to the end of the program anyway. The solution to all of this is terms. Let there be fixed terms. And I tell all these problems will come to an end. Like it has helped Nigeria, even though we had a leader who attempted to change it to 3 terms. But maximum 2 terms, and let other people have a shot. And then there'll be stability. People can then be patient. And then people can say, okay, well, do all you can. We know that you can only do a maximum of 4 years, 2 terms, and somebody else will take over. It is time that the African Union spoke, maybe at their peer review, whatever, sat down and agreed on policies like this so that all of this will stop on the continent.
Okay. Now, 80% is really a landslide victory.
Yeah.
But in a situation where the president wins 80% and the opposition say, we will not accept because there was fraud and so on, would you have advised the opposition to, okay, if it is 80%, let's just take it and move on for the sake of the country?
Ordinarily, looking at what electoral process is supposed to be, no complaint. There has been a victory, no complaint. But then if there's going to be a turnaround of events, it has to be based on what policies comes out from this president now.
Right.
Because this particular president, you can see what's happening now, that the militants are now ambushing the soldiers that were returning from a particular assignment. There's a reaction already, and we cannot overlook it. Other things will come into play.
All right.
What happens to the compressed opposition? Sometimes some might have been negotiated away by themselves. And the powerful clique that is running the country, making them to realize that there is no need to oppose this man at this present time because he has been a unifying factor for this particular country. Policies that comes out from him, and I tell you, in the next few months or days or years, his health will deteriorate.
It's okay. Thank you very much, Kolawole, for coming on the program, and Victor Hyde, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Nigel joined us from Harare, Zimbabwe, earlier on. Thank you very much as well. As Zimbabwe celebrates more than 3 decades of self-rule under the theme Zimbabwe at 34, defending our sovereignty and providing an enabling environment for sustainable economic empowerment and social transformation, the country's long record of a distressed economy and widening poverty gap remain a distant concern in the nationwide commemorations and provincial rallies fronted by marching bands and traditional dancers. And while Bouteflika may have won his re-election for another 5 years, a desire for stability and the fear of returning to the dark days of the 1990s has kept the population from pushing too hard for political change. But the image of increasingly feeble president ruling for another term has resulted in rare voices of dissent against the system. That's a show for today. Watch previous episodes of the show on youtube.com/TVC Africa Today. And until the next one, I am Mike Okwoche. And always remember, this is Africa. Bye for now.